have some questions for you.
Okay.
And
A couple of things I want to say before you do that.
yes, please.
I'm really, truly grateful for what the Arena Stage is doing this season with my work for two reasons. It's very, very nice for people to have the opportunity to see what a playwright has accomplished so far in his lifetime, since most of the time the things that people get to see are merely the most recent commercial successes. But it's nice that you're having the opportunity to spend time and see about my preoccupations and what I've been doing over the past 50 years. Stick around. I've got a few more in my quiver. However, I don't know why anybody bothers to give awards to or celebrations to somebody who is merely doing one of the few things that he knows how to do with any competence and enjoys doing it. Nonetheless, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
One last thing. I shouldn't be here tonight. I should be across the hall. I should be sitting there and listening to the performances of the plays by the young playwrights. That's where I should be. But such is life.
Well, I loved what you just said about how this is a job that you were able to do with competence. And I'd like you to take us back again to the first moment when you knew that you did have competence in writing. When was it? How did it come about? How did you realize that you're a playwright?
I'm trying to remember when I wrote my first poem. I don't think I was very old. I think perhaps I was 8 or 9. And I began writing poetry, and I kept on writing poetry until I was 26, when I stopped. I was getting better. Most of the poems I wrote when I was 26 were better than most of the poems I wrote when I was 9. I'm sure of that. And I was imitating far more sophisticated people as I went on. And I even had a couple of poems published. I had one published in the New Yorker magazine and other places. I was okay as a poet, but I've always been on to myself, sort of. At least I think I'm on to myself. And I remember thinking, Edward, you're getting better as a poet, but the problem is you don't really feel like a poet, do you? You feel like somebody who's writing poetry. And I said back to myself, yes, Edward, that's true. I don't feel like a poet. And so I said to myself, then why don't you stop writing poetry? And so I did. I wrote 2 novels in my teens, one when I was 14 of some 3,000 handwritten pages, and a second when I was 15 when my energies were either depleted or elsewhere, of only 1,500 handwritten pages. I will claim for these 2 novels that they are the worst novels that could ever be written by an American teenager. They reside in the theater collection of the New York Public Library along with the rest of my manuscripts, with the admonition, however, that if somebody wishes to examine them, a critic perhaps, or a scholar, to gain a more comprehensive misunderstanding of my work, then they may do it. But these novels may not be quoted from. They will never be quoted from. I tried the short story for a while, but I discovered that the short story and I had sort of disagreements about its nature. And the short story was sort of right. Though I wrote the first line of one short story that I think is probably one of the best first lines ever written in an American short story. It was a short story set in Rome, Italy. And the first line of that story is, Everything in Rome is uphill. That is really good. Unfortunately, from that point on, everything in the short story was downhill. So we stopped. But I decided that I was a writer, having figured out by the time I was 15 that even though I admired Johann Sebastian Bach enormously, I was never going to be as good a composer as he was, and therefore, why do it? I knew I was a writer, and I had failed, basically, at all other branches of writing, but I was still a writer, so I did the only thing I had not done. I wrote a play. It was called The Zoo Story. Now, that story I just told you isn't true, but it's a good story. Pretend I'm not going to tell you the following 3 minutes. When I was 14, I wrote a 3-act sex farce. At that age, I knew very little about farce and either less about sex. But I was very enthusiastic about what I wrote. I believe my adoptive mother threw it away, and so I can pretend it never existed. So The Zoo Story does become my first play. Now, here's the interesting thing about being 27 or however I was, and writing a play called The Zoo Story. For the first time in my life, when I wrote that play, I realized that I had written something that wasn't bad. I realized, you know, Edward, this is pretty good. This is talented. Maybe you're a playwright. And so I thought, well, let's find out what happens. And so I've been doing that for 50 years since, and I've done it 30 times. And I don't know whether I'm getting any better, but I'm still having as much fun being a playwright as I did at the very beginning.
In the video, you talk about the synergy that happened when you were really starting out, the synergy between artists, the synergy between theater companies.
Yeah, when I went to New York in 1949 and spent my the 50s in New York, it was such an extraordinary place for the arts. The serious arts were burgeoning everywhere in New York City, more than anywhere else in the United States. All the abstract expressionist painters were there. They were just beginning. The New York's School of Poets was there. They were working. The avant-garde composers were all working. It was an enormously exciting time to be involved in the arts. And I I got thrown out of college in the middle of my sophomore year, but I continued my education by being surrounded by wonderful, wonderful experimental arts, and everything was cheap. Nothing cost anything. You could go to the theater for $1. I think now about people spending $200 for an orchestra seat at one of the deplorable imitation things they call musicals these days. But I remember we all had a wonderful time learning about the arts in the company of amazing people who were practicing the arts, who hadn't become famous themselves yet, who were just starting out. And everybody in Greenwich Village, at least below 14th Street, seemed to be practicing the arts excitingly and with enthusiasm. And it was a great, great 10 years that I spent educating myself in New York in the arts.
And Edward, do you think that there's a moment like that could come again, or do you think that we're just in a whole other place as a culture?
It's a little more difficult because of the dead hand of commerce on the arts. But there's still young people getting together and making art and talking to each other about the art and realizing that what matters in the arts is not making a bunch of money at it, but doing it well, and doing it with enthusiasm and changing the art form that you're working in. And that's still going on.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that this audience would be very interested in your ideas about the supremacy of the playwright. And to talk to them about the way in which you make choices. Kathleen talked a little bit about it, but in each production that's done, you okay actors, you okay directors. I think that'd be fascinating because generally writers, after the first, second, third, fourth, fifth production, they let that go. And yet you continue to really focus on the teams that will be working on your productions. So will you talk about what rights you have as a writer and who you feel you're responsible to? Is it to audiences, the art, yourself?
It's not rights that I have. It's rights that every playwright from his first play on has. Mm-hmm. We have an organization called the Dramatists Guild. We can't be a union, we playwrights, because we're not employees. We are not paid to write something. We lease production rights to our plays and retain ownership and complete control over what happens to our plays. Mm-hmm. Every playwright, from the beginning playwright, if he has a commercial production of a play of his, has written in the Dramatists Guild contract the following: not a word of the play may be changed without the author's permission. And if there are changes made that the author has approved of that he has not made, the author owns these changes. Mm-hmm. In other words, nobody can come around and tell you how to rewrite your play. This happens all the time in theater. These days, especially in commercial theater, where producers are saying, we like your play, we like it a lot, but I think you better simplify it some. It's a little too long, and a little too complex, and a little too tough for our audience. Simplify it, make it easier, and we'll do your play. I tell my student playwrights, the two most important first sentences you must learn in your dealings with the forces of darkness are a very important one-word sentence: no. And if they don't pay any attention to that one, and they come up with you with these terrible ideas to destroy the integrity of your play for commercial reasons, then you just say to them very, very simply, go fuck yourself.
Well, Edward, it's worked for you.
And it can work for all playwrights because we have the right to take that attitude. The problem is people want to make a living, and so much commercial theater, I'm not talking about good spaces like these here, but too much commercial theater is deciding that the playwright is a small cog in a large wheel, and that the commerce of theater is more important than the art of theater, and the playwright had damn well better compromise the way everybody else does. But that's totally unnecessary, and the more playwrights would hold line, we'd have a much, much better theater. And ultimately, we'd have a much more intelligent audience.
Edward, let's dig into your plays for a few moments. I'd love to talk to you about some of the important themes that you delve into.
Well, if you really want to know, it is about everything that happens and has happened during the entire lives of all of the characters in the play, from their birth until way after the play is over. It's about all of that. Those are the two things that a play is about. And I say also that any play that you can describe in 3 sentences should be 3 sentences long.
All right.
So
then, okay.
Give it a
all
shot.
Right. All right. I'm going to go at it from another angle.
Thank you.
I'll go at it from a different
Wise
angle.
idea.
When you first are inspired to write.
I don't understand the term.
Okay. Who do you follow, the character or the story?
I discover that I am thinking about some people who apparently are knocking on my brain and want to be in a play of mine. I learn everything I could possibly can about all of them and find out about their interactions, and I start putting them in contact with each other, and eventually, several months later, it turns into a play. I'm not one of these playwrights who says, I must now write a play about this or that idea,
Right.
and I must find characters, I must invent characters who can carry that message forward. No, I start with the people, which must mean that I've been thinking about them in context. In other words, I write my plays to find out why I'm writing them. I've made all of the decisions, obviously, before I write a word on the paper. I just haven't told myself. And that's the fun of it. Otherwise, it would just be typing.
I like that. I like that. I think that's a great answer.
Okay, I'll keep it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to ask you this question because I know you won't tell me an answer to it. So I'm going to put it on the side. But
No,
what I'm excited about is Edward has at least 2 other plays that are already cooking in his mind right now.
Yes.
And so the ability for us to have more of Edward's plays in the near future, I'm hoping, is very exciting to me.
Well, with any luck, one of them will be in New York, opening the new Signature Theater on 42nd Street in next February. As long as I finish it in time to get in rehearsal. If I'd stopped coming to things like this, I might get some work done.
Well, you know, Edward, now that you've done Arena, you don't have to go anyplace else. One last question, because there's so much of what we're doing in our world right now that's about education, and you have
Not
a foundation. Not enough. No, we need to do more. I agree.
Well, you know, I'm old enough so that I remember when I went to school.
Yes.
First of all, there are 2 things that we don't deal with enough in this country anymore. And I remember I took a course called civics. Any of you remember civics? That was about how government functions, how democracy functions, and our responsibilities as informed voters.
Right.
This stuff isn't taught anymore in schools. They don't do it. And less are the arts taught in our schools.
Right.
To a certain extent in our colleges, but nowhere near enough. We are not educating a young audience in the most valuable areas of our culture. And how can we possibly consider ourselves a civilization if we don't do that?
I completely agree.
Both how to govern ourselves and how to respond to the arts properly.
I think that is the perfect end to this particular interview.
Oh, okay.
Because with Edward, you can go on and on and on because of who he is and what he represents and the ideas that he has. But I just want to thank you for everything, Edward, particularly for allowing us to honor you.
And this, by the way, thank you all for being, from what I've been able to judge by watching my plays here and some of the readings, for being a responsible and intelligent and enthusiastic audience.
Thank you.
And you.
Thank you. You're a sweetheart, you know that?